In those days, after the tribulation, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. Jesus specifically is warning people about those days. This is a term that he uses to refer to the tribulation that immediately follows the abomination of desolation.
This is absolutely fascinating. Mike Winger explains the second coming and his viewpoints on this. Guys, I'm super excited. And make sure to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't.
That when it comes to this particular section of scripture, there's actually more agreement here than there is in the stuff we've covered in the past few weeks. The abomination of desolation, there's more disagreement on that. Although I think I unpacked, a solid case for my view on the passage. We want to really get what Jesus is saying, not just to use it for like a preaching point, but to like thoroughly understand the words of Christ, where he says, in those days, after the tribulation, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers that are in the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. And then he will send forth the angels and will gather together his elect from the four winds, from the farthest end of the earth to the farthest end of heaven. What is that about? The fig tree stuff, we're going to deal with that. That's the next verse here. We'll deal with that next week in detail, the fig tree stuff and a bunch of other things the next, not next week, but 2 weeks. I'll explain later. At any rate, theology stuff. The people who are preterists, as pertains to the Gospels, it pertains to what Jesus says in this passage, the Olivet Discourse. Those people who think that stuff happened in 70 AD, even many of them would see the section I just read to you as future, as still future. So here we have like a lot of people, all futurists see it as future, even many preterists see this as future. That's pretty typical, not all of them. Certainly not all of them. I think that Apologia Studios, Jeff Durbin, I think he would be one who sees this as past, that this coming is a past event. I could be wrong here, but that's Jeff's fault, because I've listened to a couple of his sermons, and his like an hour and 20 minutes, and you still aren't entirely sure what his view is. And so take that, Jeff Durbin. At any rate, I say that as a brother. All right, it's a brother. Yeah. You need to be able to summarize your views at some point, even if your video is really long, like mine are. So here we go, verse 24. Let's look at this passage. In those days after that tribulation, the first question we should ask, right? I always ask questions when you approach the text of Scripture, is what's the tribulation? What is that tribulation? What are the days of that tribulation that he's talking about? And we went over this last week, but basically we're bringing together several passages of Scripture. Daniel 9:27, 11:31, Daniel 12:11, Revelation 13:5, and we're saying, look, these are all talking about the same thing. It's a 3.5-year period of great suffering, tribulation, of God's judgment on the planet, and it's sort of inaugurated, or you're fully aware it's happening when the abomination of desolation takes place. Then there's 3.5 years. That means then that what Jesus describes next, the second coming, is happening right at the end of that 3.5-year period. It happens in close proximity to the abomination of desolation event. Now, some people will say that tribulation, where the Bible talks about the 42 months in Revelation, 3.5 years, that's actually it's a symbolic term, 42 months, and it represents. This is not my view, guys, but some people will say it represents all of the stuff that's gone on since basically, after Christ's ascension until now.
For all the people being persecuted out there, people would probably be thinking, man, this is the tribulation. We are going through turmoil and hell.
All the tribulation, which is a very strange view that 42 months is stretched out to represent such a massive period of time. Anyway, I don't think that view works at all. So we'll move on. The thing here Jesus says is after that tribulation, and you might say, well, maybe like some people, preterists would, some of them, not all, would say that the tribulation time is like 66 to 70 AD, and it's particularly, it's earlier, even before 70 AD. It's these 42 months when Nero was hotly persecuting the church. He was bringing a lot of pain and suffering into the church. Historically, there was about 3.5 years of great suffering that Nero brought.
He would use Christians as human torches, stuff like that, like brutal stuff
on the church until he was killed himself ultimately, because he was just going to get killed in worse ways if he didn't. And they would say that's what that is. Now, here's where I'm going to push back on that view, because I think that what Jesus is saying here is that whatever you think the tribulation is in Mark 13, he's saying that his coming is going to happen 3.5 years later. So you're kind of, you kind of need to see, let me build my case for this, all right? And we're going to follow with the phrase, in those days. You'll note
I'm going to let you build your case.
in verse 24, this is probably the harder part of today's study, I imagine, as I try to imagine how easy it will be to digest everything I'm saying. But track with the phrase, in those days. In those days after that tribulation. Okay, now we're going to back up and we're going to look at this verses in context, and we're just going to notice how often Jesus refers to those days as being that immediate period immediately after the abomination of desolation, right, where this like Antichrist figure presents himself as God in the temple, demands worship, that there's this 3.5 year period, that's when Jesus comes back, is right at the end of that 3.5 year period. Here's a case for that, aside from verses I already shared. In verse 14, Jesus says, when you see the abomination of desolation standing where it should not be, let the reader understand, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. The one who is on the housetop must not go down or go in to get anything out of his house, and the one who is in the field must not turn back to get his coat. But woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days. Did you notice the those days here?
Those days.
Those days. Oops, I grabbed the wrong those. Those days. Jesus specifically is warning people about those days. This is a term that he uses to refer to the tribulation that immediately follows the abomination of desolation. Like historically, it happens right then. But pray that it may not happen in winter, for those days will be a time of tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the creation, which God created until now and never will. This is definitely those days, time of tribulation. Jesus is talking about this same time period. The second coming happens at the close of that limited tribulation time. Unless the Lord had shortened those days, no life would be saved. But for the sake of the elect whom he chose, he shortened the days. And if anyone says to you, behold, here is the Christ, or behold, he is there, don't believe him. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and will show signs and wonders in order to lead astray, if possible, the elect. But take heed, behold, I've told you everything in advance. And just a quick reminder, since we happen to read through this section, every 10 minutes, there's like a new false Christ in the world, and raising up and starting their own religious group and claiming that they're the second coming. And we know they're all wrong. I don't even have to look at their theology. I don't care if they've done some sort of supernatural thing to try to confirm who they are. Jesus himself said, ignore them all, because when I come, everyone will see it. No one's going to have to tell you.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of people get so caught up into the Antichrist, the one who's going to oppose God. But I think there's a both end, obviously. I think there will be the main opposition, like the beast. But there are many Antichrists, people who are against Christ, who come in the name and then are a perversion of who Christ is. So that's good. Makes you think about the correlation, though, when the tribulation happens. They're saying to pray that it's not in the winter, because you're going to have to go hide in the woods, essentially. And it's freezing in the winter, you know?
About it. And this would save so many people from joining cults if they would just heed the words of Jesus about his coming. Verse 24, finally, in that context, in those days after that tribulation. So Jesus' coming that he talks about here in Mark 13. It happens immediately on the heels of the tribulation. We can make this even stronger with 2 Thessalonians 2:8. It says, then the lawless one will be revealed. We're talking about the abomination of desolation guy, the Antichrist, the lawless one, the man of sin. The lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord will slay with the breath of his mouth and bring to an end by the appearance of his coming. So not only is there like an abomination of desolation that reveals this man of sin, but he continues to persecute for 3.5 years, scripture says. And then Jesus returns, and his return is what puts a stop to the guy. So yeah, you've got actually like a time clock here in scripture. There's like approximately 3.5 years from the abomination of desolation until the return of Christ. That's what we're looking at here. I would correct or try to correct people who want to use earthquakes and maybe is that a one world government, or maybe the temple's being built. And I would say don't use these things to determine the time of the end. The one thing Jesus gave, however, is the abomination of desolation.
I'm curious what his thoughts are on when you hear of wars and rumors of wars and all of these things. but then it says, know that my time is not yet come. A lot of people use that as an illustration to say, see, the end times are coming because all these wars are happening. There's earthquakes. But then it says right after that, know that my time is not yet come. So maybe there needs to be a little bit more peace.
All right, now let's go to the next question we have, which is going to be about the sun getting dark. What is up with that? Is that literal or symbolic? Now, I'll give you three options. I'll tell you the way the atheist tends to take this verse, or the skeptic or the non-believer. I'll tell you how some scholars take this verse, and then I'll tell you how I take this verse, which is going to be, although there are some scholars that agree with me too. I'm not on my own here. But I'm going to share with you a view that you probably have never heard before, most of you, and you should at least be aware of it. It's a thoughtful view. I think it's just wrong. So here we are, Mark 13:24. And Jesus says, in those days after that tribulation, then he describes these events. The sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. And the stars will be falling from heaven. And the powers that are in the heavens will be shaken. The question we have is, how do we take these things? There are three ways to take it. Like, I'll give you the skeptic way to take it. And this is how I always hear skeptics online take it. They take it in the super...
I was going to say before he said it, they take it in a super hyper literal, and they're going to be like, you believe in that? That literal thing? The stars are going to fall from heaven and the sun will be darkened? But in the ancient text, a lot of times the stars were seen as deities or some supernatural being.
Hyper literal fashion, that the sun is going to be darkened like millions of miles away. The sun will be put out. That's how they take it. And then stars are going to actually fall, like Betelgeuse, the star, is going to fall and hit the earth, even though it's far larger than the earth, and that doesn't work. Like, we're all dead if any of the stars come and hit us. And so then they would mock Jesus or mock Christians because we have this backward, Bronze Age goat herders wrote our book. They always use the phrase Bronze Age goat herders.
But I feel like not just atheists believe that, in my opinion.
They're all reading from the same talking point list. But my response to this would be, you guys, like, you're the only ones that take it that way. Okay? Like, it's just skeptics that take it that way because you've found a way to take it that allows mockery of what's there. So there is also a symbolic view. And the symbolic view, which is what many scholars would actually support, is the idea that these things, the stars being darkened, the sun being darkened, well, they represent a few things. Political powers being put out, and they're going to build a case for it. Okay, you can try to build a case for it. I'll explain it to you in a minute here. They represent political powers being put out. They represent demonic forces or pagan worship. So this could be like, say, those who are into astrology, and the idea is that your false religions, when you look to your leaders, to your imam or whoever, they're not going to be able to help you during this tribulation time. They're going to have no source of knowledge or information for you. You look to astrology, it's going to give you nothing.
Wow.
All of these false areas of worship are going to fail you. And so stars represent, of course, symbolically the worship of these false things. And it could also be the power of Satan. He's the prince of the power of the air. Paul talks about principalities and powers in heavenly places. And so this could be a reference to the spiritual shutting down of the power of Satan.
Yeah.
Okay, so there be a symbolic view that's there. And I'll give you other scriptures that people use to support that perspective in a second. Finally, there's my view, which is that, and this is probably a more common view, most of us probably hold this view, it's flexibly literal. It is literal. Jesus really means, the sun will go dark and the moon not give its light and the stars will fall, but it's flexibly literal, meaning stars are probably here talking about meteors. This shouldn't be shocking to anybody. This, it seems to me, should be the first thing you think of when you read the passage. Let me explain. Nowadays, just as back in the day, we use the phrase shooting stars. Like, if you see a shooting star, you've even told your friend, like, wow, I saw a shooting star today. Now, if your friend decides to treat you in the hyper literal skeptical standpoint, they might look at you and mock you.
You believe that's actually a star shooting? What? Crazy. Yeah, I'm 100%. It could be an eclipse. That's what a lot of people think of. That's why when there's solar eclipse, everyone's like, the world is ending. Jesus is coming back.
Think a star that's far larger than the earth crashed into the earth and you saw it? You wouldn't even be alive to witness such an event. And you would look at them and be like, are you being purposefully obtuse? No, of course we don't mean that. The sun getting dark, it wouldn't be the sun like millions of miles away, like disappearing or losing its ability to shine light. This would probably just be referring to, from the perspective of people on Earth, the sun gets dark. Now, I live in California, where we've had a lot of serious fires recently. And where I live, we're close enough to some of those fires that we've had days where the sun was dark. I mean, it wasn't like black dark. If I had lived closer to the fires, I might have been experiencing even more darkness during the daylight. But there's times where the whole sky just looks orange and gloomy, and it's weird. And this would be something like that. You could say, okay, so
apocalyptic for sure, because that is a scene straight up from a zombie movie. This is where all the zombie movies get their references from the Bible, I bet.
There could be atmospheric events happening, obstructing sunlight. That is not far-fetched. And it would be a way in which God is revealing his judgment. So, I mean, in other words, that's the flexibly literal view. This is probably a more common Christian perspective on it. It's dark from the Earth's perspective. They're shooting stars. Well, I mean, they called everything stars back then. They didn't call them planets. They called them wandering stars, right? Because they didn't follow the same pattern going around the world that other stars followed. The planets would go different directions, wandering stars. They do their own thing. But everything's called a star back then. It's not that big of a deal. All right. Let's talk about the symbolic view, because this is a view that I think most of us are not familiar with, and it also sounds really silly the first time you hear it to most of us. But I think if I can help you understand the case for it, so here's what I'm going to do. Join me on a journey while I build a case for the symbolic view and then try to refute it, because I think that this is good for our own Bible studying, our ability to study the Scripture. It's healthy when we hear other Christian perspectives on something and understand where they're coming from. That's often what we don't see in commentaries, or especially in teaching. You don't hear different views. You just hear one view.
Yeah, this is what I appreciate about Mike Winger. He does a great job explaining the other person's view, and then if he disagrees, he's going to explain, well, here's why I disagree. This is what I think is wrong with that. This is actually my opinion on this from a different perspective. And I like that, because then you're able to decide whether or not either you're going to be for it, or you know how to respond to other people who might have that view.
And as far as you know, that is the only view. And this is going to give you some different perspectives, especially on eschatology. I consider eschatology an area where we have to have lots of grace to each other. If we don't agree, we need to not be divisive on those issues. We need to not mock and ridicule. We just need to agree to disagree and love one another in the midst of it all. These are secondary topics. So what's the symbolic view of the darkness? First off, you can build the case this way. Step one, darkness is often used metaphorically in the Old Testament. Right? And the Old Testament presents sort of an example of how God often communicates prophetically to his people. So in Micah 3:6, we read about the sun going down on the prophets. But in Micah 3:6, this is not about a special sun event happen. It's really just about they lose knowledge, because sun represents light. Right? In a culture with no electricity, when the sun comes up now, you can see the land. When the sun's down, you can't see the land anymore. And so when the sun goes down on the prophets, it means the prophets will not have vision, will not have direction. They won't have words from the Lord. In Deuteronomy 28:29, it says, you will grope at noon as the blind man gropes in darkness. And this seems clearly in the context to be symbolic. He says you'll grope at noon. He's talking about, just general sort of confusion and not knowing what's going on with their culture or with their people, because God's judging them because of their sin. David I'll bring the scripture up for you, 2 Samuel 22:8. He's giving a description here of God delivering him from Saul and his enemies. I mean, we know this because it says it right here. I'll skip to verse 1. David spoke the words of this song to the Lord in the day that the Lord delivered him from the hand of all his enemies and from the hand of Saul. So this is a commemoration of God's regular deliverance in David's life. Okay, but look what he says in verse 8 of 2 Samuel 22. Then the earth shook and quaked. The foundations of heaven were trembling and were shaken because he was angry. Well, this is very symbolic here. I don't think that we have lots of accounts of David and his deliverances. We don't have the earth quaking and the foundations of heaven trembling, not in a physical sense. But this is symbolically what happened, because it's the idea that God stood up on his behalf and took action. And so there's sort of the trembling, and like you think of Jurassic Park, like when a T-Rex is coming, it's the shaking of the ground. And this is symbolically what's happening. It's symbolic because you read verse 9, smoke went out of his nostrils, fire from his mouth devoured, coals were kindled by it. This is very poetic symbolism, using darkness and shaking and trembling and fire, all as representing God's judgment. So that's true. Like in the Old Testament, we do have this. But that's not a strong enough case. Right? You haven't got me convinced that when Jesus says the sun will get dark, it doesn't look the same as when David describes this in a very poetic passage. So we need something stronger. And this is where we have the strongest and weakest part of the symbolic darkness view. It's strong because they can quote a litany of Old Testament passages. It's a little weak because when you look at those passages in detail, they don't do what you think they're going to do, at least not all of the time. So they'll give you a list of passages. And this is what I find. Like in R.T. Francis' commentary, he says, let me try to build you this view. And he just lists a bunch of passages. And then he says, basically, here's a bunch of passages. This is where darkness is used symbolically in prophecy. Therefore, when Jesus uses it, it's symbolic. Here's some of the passages. Ezekiel 32:7, Joel 2:10, Joel 2:31, Joel 3:15, Amos 8:9, Isaiah 13:10, Isaiah 34 verse 4. And he gives you this big list of passages. So what I did was I went through and just looked at each passage in context, asking the question, is it actually symbolic here? Because you can't just you can't just reference a passage and say I'm right. Like, is it actually symbolic darkness? And
I would say it's the literal in a sense with these things might happen, but not exactly how it was explained, just like he was saying. In Revelations, it says 1/3 of the earth will be destroyed from fire from heaven. So what do you think that is? Again, probably meteors, probably something falling from the sky, but not like something so massive where the entire world would be destroyed. That's what I think. I would love to know what you guys think in the comments below for sure. And I'll have the entire video in the description below so you can watch that entire thing. Mike Winger is awesome. I really like his work and his videos. So guys, thank you so much for watching. I encourage you to hit the like button and subscribe. I'm trying to hit 100,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I know we can do it with your help. So thank you so much for all the love and support. It means the world. Have an amazing day, and God bless.